Hey, peace and blessings to you. My name is Jerry B. I am the entree musician, and so are you. And absolutely, definitely, positively, so is the young man we're going to have a great conversation with. And somehow he's hiding out in Shenzhen. We don't know why. We'll find out. But he is an incredible musician, instructor, and has an amazing podcast that you should be turned on to. This is Jeremy Van Sluytman. Brother, blessings to you,
Jerry
man.
B,
How are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for inviting me on to talk with you today.
Well, I'm grateful for the opportunity. You extended the olive branch to me first, and a couple of months ago, I was sitting on the hot seat at your beautiful podcast, Our Mind on Music. And as we noted, we have very different interviewing styles. So I'm going to try to do a couple things. Number one, I'm not going to try to ask any questions that you asked of me. Okay. Secondly, I'm not going to try to upstage you because you're already better than I am on this
Oh
form.
man, I don't know.
But thirdly, we're going to have a great conversation, man, because you dig music, your life is music, and I want to find out more. Is that cool?
That's that's fantastic. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I guess the first question would be, Jeremy, why Shenzhen and how long have you been there?
Okay. Yeah, so it's a long story that I'll try to turn into slightly less long. Long story short is I've been teaching music in international schools for geez, I think it's going on 25 years now. And I started in Venezuela. Actually, I started in Ecuador teaching English as a second language, and then discovered that there were these schools called international schools. And I very quickly got the opportunity to teach in Venezuela. Um, about 20 years ago, I came to China for the first time, 21 years ago, exactly. Um, and so I've been moving around from school to school, teaching music mostly. And Shenzhen, this is my fourth year here. We have a great school here. I'm sitting in one of our two recording studios on the campus here in school as I speak with you right now. So that's why I'm here. I'm teaching music to students from grade 6 to grade 10 in an international school. And this school, it's a really great school. Actually, the first time I applied here was, geez, I don't know, it was about 2006 or 2007 when I was still fairly new at teaching. And 4 years ago, I tried again, and they said, "Yeah, come on in," and that's why
Wow.
I'm here.
Now that's absolutely excellent. Now, are you a multi instrumentalist, or are you teaching piano, guitar, trumpet, or all of them?
All of them. So ever since a very young age, excuse me, sorry. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, my sister was playing piano, and my mom said to me, "Listen, your sister has a hobby. You need to have a hobby. What do you want to do? You know?" And I said, "Well, when I grow up, I want to be Muhammad Ali."
There
So,
you go. Good
and
hobby.
so I wanted to go into boxing, and she said, "No way, no, I'm not gonna pay money for somebody to hit my son."
To pummel him.
Um, yeah, exactly. So I said, "Fine, I'll do the piano." And I very quickly grew to love it. I was really obsessed with it, actually. So I went through the Royal Conservatory of Music in Toronto. Um, and one thing that happened was at a certain grade level, around grade 5 or grade 6 in the Royal Conservatory, I had to study practice for about an hour a day. And at that point, I was still quite young. It was a big ask for me to do that long. I started to complain about it, even though I loved it. It was a long time, and my mom said, "Tell you what, you love this guy Eddie Van Halen, right? He plays guitar, so I'll get you a guitar, and what we'll do is you practice piano for 30 minutes. then you could take a break, play the piano, play the guitar for as long as you want, just as a break. And then when you're finished, you go back to the piano and you do another half an hour. Mom, I mean, I really thought, wow, is this the first time in my life I'm like winning an argument with my mom? it took me months to realize, wait a minute, I'm actually just practicing exactly the same amount, plus I've taken on a second instrument.
How did you
Um,
how did you navigate? I mean, did you just pick it up and it was very natural for you, or did you have to work at it, the guitar?
yeah, long story short, yeah, it was pretty natural for me. I already knew a lot of theory at that point, so I could just I had my dad when I was younger played a little guitar, so he had some Mel Bay books, very famous books for anybody out there. But, and so I started just picking those up and looking at the charts to show where the chords were. My uncle bought me this poster that showed how the modes worked, the pentatonic scale, and then the modes and arpeggios, and so I just did that. I don't think I ever took a guitar lesson actually. Um, and
So
then
there was no practicing to the Van Halen records. I mean, you didn't put it on and just try to emulate Eddie, or okay.
there
I
was
was gonna
there
say.
was tons of that. There was tons of that. I was really intimidated by Eddie Van Halen because at the time he was um, it was a different sound than most other people than I think anybody else was making. I also really loved Jimi Hendrix, so I learned how to play the In the West album, basically side to side AB. Red House was a big influence on me as a song because it had a lot of just really cool chord voicings, and the blues was done in a really interesting way. So I did that. Grade 9, I started playing trumpet, and then I played drums in the. So I played trumpet in the stage band, and I played drums in the concert band. I played bass for a while because one of my classmates was really ill for like a month, was away from school. And so my music teacher, Mr. Brown, said, Jeremy, you play everything. Why don't you just pick up the bass? Okay.
And there it was.
There it was. I played bass.
Now, all right, let's go back to Jimmy and Eddie. So, did your mom buy the pedals? I mean, or what happened? You're just playing regularly, or when did you get into the hey, we got to extend this sonically?
Yeah, so I was really lucky actually. At first it was an acoustic guitar. It was a Stella 3/4 size guitar, which was just a beautiful like classical guitar, and I was playing, everything, mostly rock stuff at that point. And then that same sister who was playing the piano, she was at a point where she was getting married, and her fiance had a Marshall JCM 800 amplifier with two 12 Celestian speakers and a Fender Stratocaster,
Mm.
and he
Brother-in-law,
had a
go brother-in-law, right?
oh, it was amazing. So that's Jimi Hendrix's setup, like the Marshall amp with the Fender Strat.
Hmm.
And so he said, "Listen, I'm getting married now, and I need some money." I had started working at a part-time job, so I had a little bit of money, and so he let me pay him off. I think it was in a couple of installments to buy his amp and his guitar, and he had a Boss distortion pedal, digital delay, and a Crybaby. And I was like,
Everything you
"Oh,
needed.
that's like the ideal setup." It was like he read my mind, you
Oh
know.
my God. So were you
Um,
playing in bands then at this point, or were you just still a school musician with the bands in school, or were you starting to venture out?
excuse me. At that point, I had started to. I wouldn't say I was playing bands per se, but there was a friend of mine who was really into the drums. So he bought a drum set actually off my uncle who owned a music instrument warehouse. He sold wholesale to retail stores.
Hmm.
And so my friend bought this drum set, and the two of us used to sit in his basement and play Rocky Mountain Way. by, I think that's Joe Walsh.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah,
we knew the Triumph version of it. So Triumph is a band from Toronto area,
yeah.
fantastic band, and so we tried to emulate their play, but it was just the two of us, and
But
we
you were
play that
there though.
song.
You were in the zone.
Yeah, well, we could play it, so we could play it so that it was recognizable, and we'd play basically that same riff over and over again for like a 3-hour practice, and and I'd go home and we had band practice.
So how old
Um,
were you here at this point?
at that point, I was about 15, I guess. Yeah,
So when did you
and
start writing your own stuff then?
instantly, basically, actually, the first song I was just speaking with a couple um, this week on my podcast, Our Mind on Music. I spoke with Darren and Cheryl Holland. They're the Darren Holland Project.
Mm.
And I was saying to them that my first song I ever wrote was actually with crayons in a Sesame Street doodle book that my mom had given me. So I had actually started trying to write songs long before this. By the time I was about 15, I had written a few songs. Not to say they were great or anything like that, but they were songs that I had written.
Yeah.
My sister, sorry, I have 3 sisters. So
Okay.
the second of those two is a writer. She's an author and a poet. Uh, she has always written poetry, and so one of the first songs I ever tried to play in a band situation was a song my sister had written, a poem, and I put the words to music. Um, and that drummer friend and I joined a songwriting contest
Mm.
in Pickering, Ontario. Um, we didn't win, but from that point, really, I was hooked on the idea of playing my own stuff, and
Yeah.
from there, that's actually, I would say, probably that contest was where I started to think about not just songwriting, but also arranging,
Mm.
how the instruments fit together, and knowing what I did about different instruments, I started to think, well, I don't just have to play a D chord on the guitar, and then that means I play a D chord on the piano. I can do other things.
Right. Wow.
And that's been instrumental in teaching.
Yeah, of course. Absolutely. But now, so you have this amazing brother in law, you got the gear you need, you got a drummer that you're rocking with, you got songs that you have written. What did you do, or when did you begin to record and say, I have to document everything that is happening?
So after a while, that friend sort of, I don't know if he lost interest in the drums or how this worked exactly, but I met another drummer, and he was really into this stuff, the writing and recording. He had bought a a Tascam 4-track cassette uh,
Porter
multi-track
Studio?
recorder.
Porter
The Porter
Studio,
Studio.
baby?
You and I spoke about this before.
Right, right, right. Yes.
So we
How
were
old are you?
doing
Give me your age. Give me your age at this point. 15,
uh,
16?
16
Yeah.
probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say it was about 16, and I started. My friend had bought the Porter Studio, and we started to try and record. And so, of course, as you know, maybe other people don't know, it's a cassette. It's literally a cassette that you would buy in the retail
A
store.
regular cassette. Yeah.
Yeah, and you would record on one side of the, the cassette, and then you would flip over the cassette, and you could record 2 more tracks.
Wait a
So
minute. We never did that. So the four, we never recorded because all four, well, we just, maybe we didn't know about the one side, but all 4 tracks, that was it. It was like the two on the front and the two on the back. That was the way it was explained to us. That's
I
amazing
thought
how you did that. That you
maybe
flipped it
maybe I'm
over.
I do remember us flipping it, but maybe I'm remembering a little bit incorrectly. Maybe we did that for effect, to get like the reverse thing. But I remember us flipping the tape.
Yeah, maybe
You know.
maybe for the effects, but that those 4 tracks there was the left. I mean, A side, B side.
Oh, okay, okay, yeah.
Yeah, But
But
interesting though. Interesting. I didn't mean to blast your story or anything like that. I just thought,
no,
wow,
no, not
we
at all.
never did that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we were messing around with a lot of stuff, and so we very quickly discovered that for what we wanted to record, 4 tracks was not nearly enough. So, I was multi-tracking guitar tracks and solos. I was putting harmony solos in, harmonies on the vocals. Next thing you know, it's just every time you do that, the way that you do more tracks is you bounce um, the tracks onto one track. So let's say you have 4 tracks, and then you put all of them onto track 1, and now you have 3 more tracks that are open. But every time you bounce those tracks, it creates hiss.
That's
There was
correct.
a lot of noise. Um, and so what we did, that same drummer, his name is Chris. Chris and I went to the Harris Institute for the Arts, which opened in Toronto in the very early 90s or late 80s, I don't remember. And they had a 2-inch reel-to-reel Fostex recorder. And so we were studying there. We were studying recording engineering, sound engineering, studio design. But actually, the reason we both went there is because we got free studio time on a 2-inch reel-to-reel tape. So
Understood.
that was it. Yeah. And so that's when we really started to create music that was more like what was in my head. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I could use their digital keyboards. I had a Korg M1,
M1, yeah.
which at the time was unbelievably realistic
Absolutely.
piano sound, especially.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, we had
Uh,
an M1, of course. We won't go into my story because you know my story already. But yeah, we must have been forming and maturing in music around the same time because the M1 like changed my life. You know, the layering of the strings on the piano, just it was and still is a gorgeous instrument.
it is. I just read last night actually the DX7, the Yamaha DX7 celebrates its 40th anniversary this year. It's the 40th anniversary of the. So that was the big thing. You and I again have talked about this, but it was like the DX7 was the dream keyboard, and then the M1 came out, and oh my goodness, it was like a different world.
But you can't forget the D50. You had to throw the Roland D50 in there just a little bit too. Those three were kind of like if
Absolutely,
if you're going to
absolutely.
do anything in music at that point, you had to have either one or all three of those suckers.
If you had all three, you were big time. Holy cow! I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
I saved up for months and months, and I was paying my mom on a payment plan to pay off that M1.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. So all of that stuff with the Royal Conservatory, now with my recording knowledge and the experience. So one of the things that was interesting was the band that myself and Chris ended up. I guess he formed the band, and I was just like brought in because we were already working together. Um, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
We had a really nice guy, a good friend, still a very close friend of mine who didn't play instruments at all, but we wanted him on bass. You know? It's like
Why
I,
did he have the look or why? That was it.
absolutely.
Okay.
He
Aesthetic.
he had the look. It was a little bit more than that, but not much more, to be honest. He had a lot of charisma. So he was one of those guys that would speak to somebody for 5 minutes and they would feel like it was like they were close personal friends.
Mm.
So this guy, his name's Dwayne. Dwayne got us all of our gigs without question. He became our de facto, uh, he became our manager.
Gotcha.
So it was like that. We already had in our minds that we didn't want to just play music. We wanted to play it for people. We wanted to get out there, play gigs, and sell the music and all that. And Dwayne was the guy. So I taught Dwayne how to play the bass so he could be in the band.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
What was awesome about that was that meant that I had to think even more critically about how all this fit together, because I had to know then all the parts. Chris and I used to sit down and multi-track record every song to take the demo to the band for them to learn it. And I recorded everything except the drums, and Chris and I did the vocals together. So, but everything else, keyboards, guitar, bass, it was all me.
Now, were you still at the school at that time with the 2-inch tape? You were still there? Yeah,
Yeah,
very cool.
yeah. So yeah, so that happened while we were at that school. We really formalized the band idea.
Hmm.
And all of that, I mean, I definitely think when I started teaching music in Venezuela, that experience, possibly even more than my knowledge of theory and the hours that I had spent playing the piano, etc. I think that band was what helped me to think when I saw kids sitting in front of me who had no idea how to play anything,
Hmm.
how to sit down with them and to get them to play music and start to develop a love for it, you know?
Yeah.
And I've applied that for my entire career.
So you have Dwayne to thank for that. Did you thank him? You got to write him an email or something. Thanks, Dwayne. Yeah,
I'm sure I've thanked Dwayne many, many times. He and I typically, when I go home for the summer, that's one of the people that I make sure that I see.
that's excellent. He's still in Canada then.
Yeah, yeah, he's in Ontario.
So
Yeah,
is he managing or is he playing bass or did he take
not
all of that
not
great
anymore,
instruction?
but sorry.
I said all of that great instruction. What did he do with it?
He did play in bands for years and years after I had left Canada, um, and he actually went into playing keyboards for a while, which I thought was like, I was really surprised how things develop sometimes. But he had gone off bass, started to play keys, and in recent years he's stopped playing in bands. I'm not sure if he's playing at all, but he did play for a number of years after I left Canada. So it didn't just go, into the air. It actually kept going for a bit.
Well, tell me then. I've got a couple questions with regard to that. So tell me then, what was the impetus of leaving Canada? You had the band that was going on. You guys are rocking across, you know, the Canadian Peninsula, and you're just moving forward. So when did you say, "I'm out of here"? What was the impetus?
That's a great question. It's so one of the things that happened was the band was stalling. Um, we had put we had done a couple of demos and we had put them out, and we weren't really getting as much notice as I hoped. And this is in retrospect. I go, I think to myself, we were doing fine, but at the time I was 19 or 20, and I wanted to be Eddie Van Halen now. I I didn't know about different ways that you develop, different ways that you also create income streams and all those kinds of things. I would just wanted to be a rock star, and that was it. You know, so I felt like the band was stalling. It wasn't taking off like I had hoped. And also, we had started to get into, we had at that point a manager that wasn't Dwayne, a different guy. We had an agency that was backing us and getting us shows around and things like that. We did a little um, sort of Ontario and Quebec tour. Um, and I started to feel more the business of music than the art of music. And um, we had the agency and definitely our manager starting to tell us things like, you got to create an image. Like, okay, so Jeremy, you've studied Royal Conservatory and you're the guy who does all the theory and stuff. So we're going to make you the character in the band. You are the professor, you know? And Dwayne was the lover boy, and Chris on drums was the wild man, and I was like, I don't know. I want to make great music and I want people to enjoy it, but I don't think I want to be a character in a play as well. For better or for worse. That's where we were, and I just started to feel like I didn't like the feeling of the music, of the business of music, you know?
Yeah.
Um at the same time, a friend of mine, another good friend of mine, a great blues harmonica player actually, He had gone to Ecuador on a 6-month just sojourn. He decided to go off and teach English as a second language and explore South America. And he came back with these fantastic stories of learning Spanish and the music there, like, you know, the salsa, merengue, and all that stuff.
Right.
And I just thought, man, there's so much more world out there, you know. I think I want to see some of that.
Mm.
And so I decided to do the same thing. I thought I'll go to Ecuador for 6 months. I'll teach English so that I'll have some money to be living. I'll play music. You know, I don't know if you know anything about Ecuador, but there's a fantastic town about 2 hours outside of Quito, the capital, Quito, called Otavalo.
Mm.
And Otavalo is this amazing place where the people there, they dress in very traditional clothing. Um, and the music there, they have an instrument. Um, they have, you know, like the pan flutes. You know, Paul Simon brought out the song "I'd rather be a hammer than a nail." I can't remember the name of the song.
Yeah.
Um,
I remember the line.
yeah, so that song, the name is escaping me right now, but that sound of the charango, the pan flutes, and all of those instruments, traditional instruments, that comes from Peru and Ecuador, and it is very prominent, or at least it was at that time, in Otavalo. So part of it was I wanted to go to Otavalo and learn about that stuff, you know. Anyway, so that's my plan was to go to Ecuador for 6 months, have an adventure, and then go back to Canada and continue with what I was doing, you know, the music and all that.
Rejoin the
And one,
band or just do something solo?
I think at that point it might have been more like in a different direction, maybe more solo type stuff or looking for a different band, you know. Um, I I had nothing against being in that band. I loved what we were doing, except I just felt like people were starting to move in different directions and feeling different about whether or not they want to do it. So it's hard to say. In my mind, I would have just gone back to that same life and then see where it takes me.
But what did you do? What did you
I
actually do?
so I had purchased return tickets from Ecuador, which I couldn't sell back. I couldn't get refunds on. So what I did was in order to afford to go from Toronto to Quito, I had to do a multi-stop trip
Mm.
where I flew to, um, I think it was Miami, and then I flew to um, Costa Rica, and then I flew to Venezuela, and then I flew from there to Quito from Caracas, you know. And my family is from South America. I have family in Venezuela. So I said, you know what? I'm going to extend each one of those stops on the way there and on the way back.
Wow.
So I ended up spending a month in Venezuela hanging out with my cousins and spent a week in Costa Rica. And on the way, when I was supposed to come back, what I had done was I said, okay, I'll take all of those flights as far as Miami,
Mm.
right? Because Miami to back to Venezuela, back to Caracas is or was at the time really inexpensive. So I said, I'll take those flights. I'll go to Venezuela. I'll go to Costa Rica. I'll go to Miami. I'll hang out for a bit, and then I'll fly back to,
Right.
and I'll just stay in South America.
Wow.
And so that's what I did. And I ended up not having the money to take the flight from Venezuela because I spent my money from Miami to Caracas. So I had to take a bus from Caracas to Quito, which took 3 days through Colombia.
Oh my gosh. Did you have your guitar with you when you were?
Yeah, Chris's guitar actually. So Chris, I didn't mention this. Chris, the drummer from the band, he was in a similar situation. Obviously, we were in the same band and everything. I ended up, I'll say, convincing him to come with me. So the two of us did all of this together with his guitar
Oh, wow.
and his Porta Studio.
Amazing. I didn't know. See? See, here I'm
Yeah.
thinking that you're this lonely nomad, and but you got a music partner with you, so that's cool.
Oh yeah, I mean, still today, he's like my brother, he and Dwayne. Um, and Chris, absolutely, the two of us traveled all over the place. We recorded a ton of music all over the place. And yeah, it was a fantastic adventure, but the long well, it's already a long story. So I guess the summary of this portion of it, um, because we had traveled through Venezuela, I discovered that one of my cousins actually owned a small recording studio in Venezuela.
Wow.
So Chris and I talked to my cousin and said, "Listen, you got this hobby studio." He had like really nice equipment in there, and it was a really nice setup, but he just had it for his own recording. He loves music as well. My whole family, there are people, especially the Venezuelan part of the family, loves music.
Yeah.
We said, listen, why don't we make this into a project studio? Like, Chris and I know how to work a studio, so why don't we just go and do some recordings in your studio? And so that ultimately, I sort of got out of teaching for about a excuse me, it was only about a year,
Hmm.
but I started working in his recording studio in
Oppor-
Venezuela. So the first time I ever worked in a
Opportunist,
studio, yeah, yeah, it's just kind of like skipping from one thing to the next.
man.
And then I discovered that I love making music, but recording can be quite lonely, actually. The band comes in for a week. You have a total party putting mic placement and everything else, and this is the days when, all of the instruments were recorded live and stuff, you know, and then I spent the next 6 months mixing it down and, adding tracks or whatever, but it was just me in a studio, you know, well, myself and Chris. I discovered that wasn't for me. I'm a people person.
Hmm. Interesting. Interesting. So you didn't like the mix portion of it. You loved the recording, didn't like the mix. Loved the performing, didn't like the mix.
Yeah, exactly. Which is funny because I do that as a hobby now, But when I was looking at as my future career, like spending, you know, 9 months out of 12 in a room by myself listening to sounds, that's different than doing it like I do now, where I teach, I do my podcast, I have, lots of things, lots of interaction with people
Yeah.
connected to music. And then when I need some quiet time and I want to be creative but quiet, then I sit and I mix for a couple hours.
Mm.
For me, that's very different than making it.
Just different things you mix. You mix your own music, or just you're doing different projects for others, or what?
Mostly my own stuff. It's mostly that part of it is a hobby. I like to do remixes of things. So I now with the technology, you can find like isolated vocal tracks, isolated guitar tracks, etc. So I have done that. I've taken an isolated vocal track of Stevie Nicks singing for Fleetwood Mac, Rhiannon. Excuse me. And then I created the what I thought the music could sound like with that vocal or for that vocal,
Sure.
reverse engineering it. Um, and then I create my own music as well. And I love playing around with the sounds now that I have like almost endless amounts of tracks. Now I can do what I was hoping Chris and I could do back then.
Right. Well, where were you? Where were you at? 24, 16 during those times? How many tracks did
Um,
you have?
well, I sorry. Can you ask the question again?
Yeah. So when you and Chris had gone to the school with the 2-inch tape, how many tracks were you limited to? Because you can do anything now. I mean, you have thousands, but were you limited to 16, 24 tracks? What type of
I
studio?
believe it's 24 track.
24.
24 track.
Yeah.
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 I just saw what I'm going through this Sunset Sound video series on YouTube. Where they're talking about Prince and they're bringing in everybody who worked, and at that time Prince was limited to 24 tracks, And Susan Rogers, who was the engineer on that, was talking about, him really, taking advantage of those 24 tracks because he knew he was limited. So every track had to have weight, and every track, every instrument had to stand on its own because you couldn't. And then, they go back a generation to the Beatles where they only had 4 tracks. And you go, oh my God,
How did they
every
do it? Yeah.
phrase, without the noise, of course, of the Porter studio. I mean, they were able to to overcome that. But 4 tracks, it really makes you think about exactly what you're going to do. But now, let me ask you another question. You want to respond to that? Go for it.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that what you just said was exactly on point, because that was one of the big things, is that I used to sit down with the M1, and as I mentioned before, like the guitar player is playing X chord.
Yeah,
The only thing I tried to do was not play in exactly the same octave as the guitar player. I would just play at a higher octave or maybe a different inversion of the chord.
sure.
And it was at that moment when, for us, 24 was mind blowing,
Mind blowing. Yeah,
that we had.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
But I still realized that my string parts, for example, that I was playing on the keyboard, couldn't just be block chords repeating what the guitar did. I had to start to think about voicing.
Correct.
And again, I think, those are experiences that when I sit down with the orchestra now in our school and I arrange the parts for, the entire violin section, the viola section, the cello section, the flutes and the trumpets and da, 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 all of that stuff is in my head,
Yeah,
and it came from that time.
yeah, yeah. No, I understand. I absolutely get that. What I didn't ask you was during this time, I don't know if it was on the sojourn to Ecuador or before you left Canada, had you released any of your recordings?
Yeah, so we had recorded, actually what we had recorded was demos. We did 2 5-song EPs, and we had done a couple of singles that we had recorded, and we were selling them at our shows. But really our focus was shopping those to the record labels, to the better, bigger and better management companies, and the agency in Canada. One, I don't know what now actually, but the biggest agency that I knew of for musicians at the time was called the agency, and that's who we had booking our shows and stuff at a certain point. And we got all that by shopping our demos to them. So yes, we had recorded. Yes, we had sold it to people, but in very limited quantities. It wasn't like we had a major uh, label or anything like that.
But that's
Um,
that's that's fine. I mean, you were actually doing the work of an entree musician, so to speak. You were actually doing it. How did that feel? Releasing the first CD or whatever format you released on, and then secondly, what were you personally learning about the business uh, as you were advancing?
so it felt fantastic. I mean, actually, as a funny connection thing, Chris's mom is from Finland. She had taken our first cassette to Finland when she just went home to visit family and stuff. And she went into a radio station and said, "Hey, this is some great music. This is a great band from Ontario, Canada. Would you play them?" Sure enough, they played us. So we got played on the radio in Finland, which was like, probably, I don't think we were on regular rotation. It was just, she had a recording of, I remember it was Madonna, a song by Madonna, Fading Out. And then the guy said a bunch of stuff in Finnish, and then we heard Out of Bounds, which was the name of the band. Out of Bounds from Canada. And then he plays the song, and I was like, that's my keyboard part. Jun, 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 jun. And I was just like, it was unbelievable. The idea of sitting down in my mom's basement, chugging away on that guitar that I had bought from my brother-in-law when I started to play the M1, and then hearing those ideas that were in my head not only recorded but actually being played on a radio somewhere. So that was very cool.
It's real cool.
And my perspective has changed completely in terms of the business of music, because of the things that you talk about on the Entre Musician, which is, all of the different things you can do with that. So many avenues that you can explore. And, what you were just talking about. My perspective at the time was I was broke and I needed to make consistent money. And at that time for me, I was not in a position where I was willing to say, okay, I have to pay for the U-Haul van that we have to rent to go to Montreal. And then I have to pay for the sound system and the effects units and all of that. And then when we get paid from the gig, if we get paid, because not every not every gig was great about that.
You good? Yeah, yeah.
Well, I mean, we had paid and non-paid gigs, but then we also had paid gigs that didn't pay.
I was saying I was being synonymous. I mean, it's just,
Oh, okay.
anyway, I'll save that
Yeah.
for another episode. But yes,
Yes, yeah. But
saying the
all
same
of
thing.
that stuff at a point in my life where I needed to pay rent, like we're now where I'm, let's say 21, um, and I'm at a point where I'm finishing off studying, and I need to pay off a lot of things, and I needed to pay for just life, eating and living. And I didn't feel like the music business, as I was seeing it at that point, was going to help me pay my bills consistently. Whereas looking at teaching piano, or later on, it turned out to teaching just music in a school, that was a consistent paycheck. I was still in music. I could still do what I loved, but I also knew that at the end of the month, my rent was paid. I could put food on the table. And that was the way that I saw it at the time. So the way that you posed the question was, what did I learn about the music business? I think I'm sort of answering it on a bit of an angle, is like what I was thinking at that time about the music business.
Exactly. That was my hope. The intention was I'm 19, 20. I have this band. We're playing out. Now we have the agency representing us. We're selling music at smaller quantities. I'm playing some gigs that I'm not getting paid at, or at least there's some shystiness going on
Mhm.
in
Yeah,
some of the situations that were arrangements did not pan out. And here's my perception of where the music industry is now. I can't say that too much has changed in the 40 years, but you know, has your perspective now, changed in the sense that, okay, this is the music industry. Pretty much there are winners and losers, and I'm going to be a winner. I can make my own way, and here are my options before me. You chose teaching, but you didn't choose to give up on your dream of writing and still producing your own music, because that's less about the music industry and more about your heart and what you were put on this earth to do. At least that's what I gather by the way you're answering the questions.
absolutely. I mean, one of my favorite parts of my current job teaching music is that I do work with a number of different types of instruments. Even in my time here at this school in the 4 years, I've been choir director, I've been strings, and like strings leader. I've been general music. So all of that's cool. And the thing that I love about that really is when I sit down with Muse Score, which is what I'm now using to transcribe music. And after speaking with you, I have started looking more at Ableton and Logic rather than GarageBand. Not because I felt like you talked me like you were talking badly about GarageBand or anything, but when I realize what my needs are, sometimes you just need to peek through the door and say, "Oh, there's a whole other possibility." When I sit down with MuseScore and I start arranging the parts, and I start looking at the ranges of the instruments and the harmonies I can create, and I not so long ago I did an arrangement of the Avengers movie theme, you know, And that was really a lot of fun because I have beginner. Okay, so for example, in the trumpets, I have like an absolute beginner who's like has a as he's playing, he has a fingering chart beside his paper to try to remember which valves to press to play a B flat or a C or. And then I have another player who's been playing for a couple of years, and he's got pretty good tone and he's pretty good at it. And so I sit down and I'm trying to make up these trumpet parts, not just based on what sounds good for the song, but also what will that student be able to play to participate in this group. And at some point now, the idea is that we have 40 kids on stage performing this arrangement, some of them very experienced and skilled, and some of them absolute beginners, some instruments that don't exist in that song typically. Those are the challenges, and that's the fun that I have with creating in music in the job that I'm doing now.
That's excellent. Absolutely. So now going back to the music business question, though, that was the 19-year-old Jeremy. Here's the something, whatever, if you want to share your age, Jeremy.
Yeah.
What do you think about the music industry now? What are your thoughts? I mean, you are slightly a degree or two removed because of the full time teaching, but just from the standpoint of other full time musicians, what is your perspective?
Okay. So 51 is the magic number right now. um, excuse me. I think part of the answer to this is a little bit like when you look at investing, or like when you're looking at taking your little lump sum of money that you have, or your big lump sum, whatever it is. But for investors, you have to decide what your comfort level is.
Yes.
What is your risk aversion scale. And I think part of my answer for what do I see with music now comes from that perspective, that I've managed to put myself in a position where my level of risk tolerance is met. I'm able to look at the music business in terms of what can I create, what can others create, and how can I help get the word out of these creators, like these musicians and songwriters that I interview on my podcast. All of that is from a perspective where I do have a 8 to 5 job as a teacher. I get a regular paycheck, and so I'm in a situation where I feel comfortable to be able to say, okay, now from where I'm sitting, I can look at the music business and answer your question.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I discovered in early days, I was not, again, my my risk tolerance was not such that I could wait and see if I got a gig this month to pay the rent,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So that's part of it. In terms of the music business overall, what you're asking, I think it's new challenges, it's different challenges. In a lot of ways, it's a lot more challenging. I've been speaking a lot on my podcast and on our YouTube channel, even in my blog posts on WordPress and Substack, about this whole idea of streaming. I mean, Spotify recently put out a notice saying that they were going to be changing their policies. Right.
Right. That
Um,
threshold thing.
yeah. So you have to have, is it 1,000 streams before they'll even look at whether or not you can
Yeah.
monetize?
Yeah. Yeah. And
Yeah.
I don't know. I guess I'll say, I see class action lawsuit at some point. Somebody has to step up and go. I mean, because a stream is a stream and an agreement is agreement. And, when I don't qualify for the agreement because you say so. I mean, well, for me personally, I'll take myself off of Spotify. That's just, I don't know what, I'm battling with myself as to what rabbit hole to go down, on that. So I'll let you continue. How about that?
Okay. I, I think that's a really interesting conversation we could have, and I think it
Yeah.
would be, it would probably be a whole a whole episode unto itself.
Yeah, it,
It
it
would
needs
be.
to be. It
I
needs
think
to be.
so, and I know that you do you meet with weekly with other musicians, creators, producers, etc. Maybe that would be a great forum for that conversation too, because
Yeah.
it's something I've been struggling with. I'm sorry,
Nope.
the Spotify Wrapped. Everybody's been putting out their year end summary thing. There's Spotify has Wrapped, and YouTube has it, and blah blah blah. Yeah, I'm just saying that it's sort of like I'm seeing it all over social media and stuff. And I've been struggling with that because one of the things I've been talking about a lot on my podcast is Stage Dive, which is a streaming platform who are trying to be the good guys. And I think they will be. Like, their whole plan is that they're going to take 50% of streaming revenue and share it with the artists, divided by the amount of streams that you got. So in other words, I've been saying this phrase, they didn't say this, but it's the concept is get streams, get paid. That's it. And I've been struggling with the fact that I am on Spotify and I am on YouTube and I'm like feeding this monster that I'm then talking against.
Sure. Sure. Now, but the perspective is, and going back to the entree musician and the community and the conversations that we've been having, we have broached this subject. But the perspective is to look at a Spotify. I didn't mean to cut you off. You push a
No?
button and it causes a reaction. But the thing about it is to look at it for what it is. It is really basically advertising. And you have to look at it like, okay, it's an advertising vehicle that doesn't cost me anything. And so it's just showing the public that I'm here because I'm not making any money on it. And
Right.
if I glory in the Wrapped and how many streams, that means nothing because it didn't put anything in the bank. So I don't need the accolades. I don't need the
Mm.
YouTube Tube Buddy accolades. I don't need the likes, and I think Facebook even in my notification just the other day said, "Well, you've earned something." What? I don't need it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that in a way that's insensitive or ingratiating. I'm saying for not being gracious, that's fine, but it doesn't put bread on the table. Here's the thing. We've just come from, in this taping, we've just come from the Black Friday meltdown, okay? Where
Mm.
in the in the in the music industry, as far as music equipment, software, plugins, everybody got paid, right? Everybody got paid. So
Mm.
nobody said, "Oh my God, you only made 2,000 streams on Spotify and they didn't pay you what you were worth. So we're gonna lower this plugin for you." No, the plugin was what it was. It was $29 or $49 or $99 or whatever.
Mm.
So everybody gets paid but the musician, and the musician needs to find out and be responsible for the things that are gonna put bread on the table: the likes, the loves, the thumbs up, the Wrapped, the whatever, the little things they give you that doesn't cost them anything because they email them to you anyway, the little trophies. That doesn't cost them nothing to make it. It's just a little certificate. It means nothing if you are not taking control of your music and finding out how you actually get paid.
That's
Sorry.
it.
This is your
Yeah.
interview, not mine, but you know, I mean, let's really, begin to focus here on how this happens. So if it's a stage dive, and that's
Mm.
fine for them, but again, God bless them because I don't know them. I haven't done the research as you have. So I cannot say anything good or bad. What I can say is that you have to look at all of the opportunities that are there for you and that are available for you. And sometimes, if there is no opportunity, you have to create the opportunity. So that's where we need
Right.
to be. And I'll
Right.
put back on my interviewer's cap. And
No, I think that's fantastic. What you just said makes perfect sense to me. As you know, I've spoken with you a couple of times now. I was in one of those forum chats about the industry as well. So Yeah, absolutely. And also, I mean, you're the way that I see this, people use the word interview all the time, but for me, it's all a chat, right? Like if it was just me talking at you about my history, I don't think that'd be that interesting. It's the whole idea that we're interacting. I know you have not just clear ideas on this, but actually you are helping to lead people to understand how to turn their creativity into income that actually, like you said, puts bread on the table. So I really appreciate your input on that.
The
When I look
interesting
at
thing
the,
about that, though, too, just to cut you off again, and I'm not trying to do that. See, I'm giving you the big stage now, but the interesting thing about that, too, is because of our age, I'm 58, you're 51. Um, in working specifically with musicians, not especially, there are some musicians who are under the age of 50, but that was the demographic that I chose to really pour into because there's already a lot of insecurities that the quote unquote music industry has put upon them because the music industry is about the youth and it's about pop. And boy, God, after you're 40 years old, dude, go be a manager. Don't pick up your guitar. Don't try to create or even start a career where the gentleman, I think he was on the call, Thomas Alexander from
Mhm,
Edmonton,
mhm,
Canada, is gigging
yep,
more now than he was in January when we started the conversation with him. I mean, he
yes,
can't be on the calls this weekend because he's in a Ray Charles tribute orchestra leading the pack. Praise God, he's
wow,
74 years old. You understand what I mean? But when he came
wow,
into the entre musician, it was like, well, yeah, well, this is what I used to do, and these are recordings I used to have, and it's great to see him now. Like I won't be there. I got gigs this weekend.
yeah.
Fantastic,
I,
you
I
know?
I was shocked when you said 74, even though actually I had heard that because when we were chatting before,
Yeah,
but this man does not look his age. He looks considerably younger, actually. And I think what makes sense to me about that, it doesn't shock me. It makes me very happy that's happening. But think of the experience, the knowledge, the ability that that man brings to that gig that he's going to. Now, if those people who are organizing that um, event and who are promoting it, etc., they know what they're getting because he's walking in with all of that prior knowledge. And so a younger musician who might stand up and look flashy in the front,
yes,
he might have told them how to hold their instrument close to the mic or, about, all of those things,
yes.
and that's what makes it fantastic. The fact that he's doing that and the fact that you're talking about that. Yeah, I think there are tons of opportunities. It's so easy now um, to talk about AI and talk about streaming and talk about all of these things that are working against musicians being able to make any money off of their creativity, you know? But then one of the things that I really like about what you and the entre musician community are doing is you're not shoving those like, behind the door or under the carpet or something, but you're also not stopping there. You're saying, okay, so yes, there are factors that are working against us. Okay. And there are tons of opportunities. It's like a whole SWOT analysis where you turn the threats into opportunities and strength and weaknesses into strengths.
Correct.
It's that idea. And I really love that because otherwise, like what we were saying a moment ago about, I have my podcast is streaming on Spotify and I feel like I'm feeding the monster, but at the same time, we're in a transition period right now where I mean, that is, as you said, it's like advertising. If I don't put it on something, it doesn't exist, basically. If you and I sit here and chat and then you say, okay, but I'm not going to put it on any of these platforms because I don't like their system, then nobody's going to hear this.
That's correct. That's correct. And so you have to use the vehicle that you have, because this is on the Entree Musician is on Spotify. It's also on YouTube, and Bandzoogle was just purchased by DistroKid. So the monster gets bigger in the different variations, but you do what you need to do. And going back to something that you just said, is like every single decade there's always been an obstacle. It's like, what's the monster to fight now? Okay, so now the big marketing word is AI, but AI has been around for a long, long time. But here we go with, okay, I have these opportunities, I have these obstacles. How do I overcome? And that's it.
Yep.
That's everything. And even if we were not in music, it doesn't matter the discipline or the science that you're in, there's going to be an obstacle. How do I overcome it? And that's what I do.
That's right.
Now, at some point, we have to talk about our Mind on Music podcast, because we're like an hour in and we haven't even broached the vision of our Mind on Music, and how wonderful it is. And when I say that, please, Jeremy, hear me. My nose is brown enough. Okay, I don't have to say anything I don't mean. Okay, I don't kiss any butt. It's brown enough. Okay, but I really do think that you have an incredible podcast. I do appreciate listening to some of the topics and some of the people that you bring on. What has been your vision for our Mind on Music? And again, what was the impetus of you even starting it? Because you got your paycheck, you're a great teacher, you're living your best life, but now here comes this podcast thing. What happened?
I love that you're asking me that question, and I will say that a lot of clarity came to me on why I do this when I spoke with you and the other creators on the Entre Musician, because actually I don't believe it was you who asked me that question the first time on the Entre Musician when we were chatting. Um, so how did it start? I have a good friend, Leon, who was my co-host for the first 20 or so episodes of Our Mind on Music. He and I have been friends for since I first came to China. I met him the day I arrived in China in 2002. And he and I talk about music. We have, of course, other interests, and our families get together and our sons play together and stuff. But when we talk music. Why? Because the two of us love music. I mean, it's called Our Mind on Music because that's where our heads are almost always at. And so I read this book called This Is Your Brain on Music by Daniel Levitin. And I was saying to Leon, this is just, for me, it was like a game changer. The amount of analysis and just the interesting perspective um, of a highly studied psychologist, scientist, whatever you want to call him, musician, producer, like it was incredible. And I said, I remember one day I was sitting at home and I got a text out of the blue from Leon saying, "Have you ever listened to Journey's third album?" Like, who sends that out of the blue? Like, only Leon to me. And I said, "Man, I just finished reading this book and you're sending this text. We should be doing this like for other people to share in and enjoy, because I think we're not alone. I'm guessing that there are other people out there who talk about music and think about it as much as we do." And so we started talking about music, and we started talking from our perspective, like what's interesting about it. Thelonious Monk and all of the bop people, and then we started thinking, well, what came before that? What came after it? Because that's just a personal interest, and that's where it came from. And then we started talking about producers. And if you talk about jazz and you're going to talk about recording, you have to talk about Rudy Von Gelder, who is an engineer that just, I mean, what didn't he record? Yeah, you know. So we just started to talk about this stuff, and people started to watch it and listen to it and comment on it. And I thought, this is interesting. But one of the things that happened is my first sister, so I've talked about my piano playing sister, my writing sister. I haven't talked about my accountant sister,
Uh-huh.
who, she listened to it and she loved the interaction between myself and Leon because we're goofy, you know. We're just, you know, it's a lighthearted look on things. We're not being really heavy, you know. And then she made the comment. She said, "You know what? I love hearing you guys talk, but there are moments where I get lost in what you're talking about because you're talking about the Neumann microphone that Rudy von Gelder used, you know, in tight miking as opposed to other ways of doing." And she said, "It's interesting. I love listening to you guys talk, but I don't know what you guys are saying sometimes." And that's when I realized what our mind on music could be, which is basically speaking with musicians, music enthusiasts, creators, producers, and try to bridge that gap to where we speak about it in a way that we're talking about our passion, but also in a way that people who don't have a clue what a Neumann microphone is can start to understand why it would matter for us to talk about that and to not be alienated from the conversation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, really, that's what our Mind on Music is currently aimed at.
Hmm.
I also started putting out videos of other people talking. Geddy Lee, the singer and bass player from Rush, is a big hero of mine for lots of reasons. Not just because he's like an incredible player and contributed to in my mind's one of the greatest bands, you know. But listen to that man talk. His intelligence and his wisdom and his insight, you know. So I saw a video of him talking about what is originality? And I just thought that is too good to not share. So I started sharing things other than just the episodes. For that reason, I want people to understand and be thinking about things like, am I ripping people off if one part of my song sounds like Van Morrison? Or is that just my influences um, mixing together to make what is my current voice?
Yeah, because you are what you eat, basically.
Right, exactly. And so I started doing that, and then it wasn't enough. I felt like I needed to say more, but the video editing and everything else wasn't always conducive to me also having a 40-hour a week job, which as a teacher, anybody who teaches knows that's not 40 hours. We go home and we do a lot of stuff at home too. And then I have weekend performances and blah, blah, blah. So I thought, okay, I'll write a blog. So I started writing um, on the blog. It's mostly on WordPress, but I also have it on Substack and Medium and a couple other places. Um, because I needed to say more about the topics that I was covering. And all of that is aimed at reaching different people through different media to appeal to the people who know what I'm talking about when I talk about studio specific things, or the people who just love Rumors by Fleetwood Mac and they never thought about how they recorded it. They thought about the lyrics and the way the music makes them feel, and they get a little glimpse that is enough of a bite-sized chunk to be palatable to understand the mastery of creating that music.
Hmm. Hmm. Did you see the documentary on the making of Rumors and what they were going through personally and the challenges that they were having? That was, I don't even remember the title of the documentary, but amazing.
Yes.
And that's why that album sounds that it can't be duplicated, you know, because of the personal traumas they were experiencing while they were walking through. You can only make music if you're undergoing that type of pressure. It was pretty intense.
Yeah, I mean, it's so recently in the last month or so, I had a whole conversation going. So we have our Mind on Music Facebook group. So we're on Facebook and we have a group there. Currently, it's about 75 people or something like that who are just talking about music, which
Yeah.
I love, music community.
Yeah.
And one of the questions was a person, a girl named Sherry in the group posed the question, why don't I ever do record reviews? Because from her perspective, that's her favorite album of all time. And she's like, I'd love to hear you talking about that album and playing clips from it and stuff. So I've started working on that actually. And what I loved was people who, like my sister, the accountant, Loretta is her name.
Mm.
She doesn't know, and she says herself, she knows nothing about music, but she knows how music makes her feel, and she knows why she loves it, and she knows what she loves, you know? And her input on what was her favorite song and why it was her favorite song is phenomenal for me, you know? To have somebody who thinks they don't know music realizing they just know it in a different way than I do,
Correct.
you know?
Correct.
So, yeah,
Did you
that's what I'm
ever
enjoying.
experience hearing the same song with someone at the same time and getting a different either sensation or meaning from it? Like it's spiritual, so you didn't get the same thing equally. You both or the three or four of you may have been touched, but you come away with a different perspective. You ever had that
Yesterday
experience
morning,
before? Hmm.
yesterday morning, I have a like, I mean, that's happened to me tons of times because you and I can look at the same painting by Picasso and see different things, right?
Sure.
You know, but yesterday morning I was listening to Jaco Pastorius' Portrait of Tracy,
Wow.
which I just love that song. I mean, he's made so much. He made so much good music in his life, but that song for me is a showstopper. You know, and my wife and I were sitting there together, and she was doing her thing, and I was doing my thing, and then I said, "You got to listen to this song. This is just. I think it's anybody can understand why this is beautiful." You know, and so I played it for her, and she was like, "Oh, it's what instrument is that?" Because she has no idea who Jaco Pastorius is, you know, what instrument? And I said, that's a bass. And she was like, wow, okay, that was surprising, which is part of the reason it's so interesting. The fact that he used harmonics so prominently. Victor Wooten does a great talk about this. I mentioned that to you because you have spoken with Reggie Wooten.
Yes, yes, many times,
Yeah,
and Victor through him. So I'm grateful for that.
yeah,
But no name
that's,
dropping. Keep going. No name dropping.
yeah, no, no, that, I mean, that wasn't my intention there. It was to say that Victor Wooten, who I think is a phenomenal musician, etc. He speaks with reverence of that song. Just to just to put some perspective for those of us who know those names, and like for Victor Wooten to look at the thing and say that was a major influence on him. In fact, he said that's how he learned harmonics, was learning that song, right? That's my perspective when I listen to that song. I think it's beautiful. I think there's a whole story, and there's Jacopo Astorius' story, and there's so much when I listen to it. There's a depth and a breadth. My wife listened to it and said, it doesn't sound like a bass, you know, which is, she thought was kind of cool. And then I said he wrote it for, I believe it's for his daughter. Tracy is his daughter. And she's like, oh, that's beautiful. Like her connection to that song was the fact of somebody sitting down and writing music with a person in mind. That's what she heard. I have this entire movie playing in my head as I listen to it, you know?
Absolutely.
um, yeah. So yeah, all of those things that I just said, that's it happens all the time.
Yeah, I'll tell you this about my beautiful wife because we see music differently. How she stayed married and stays married to a musician for 28 years without really being, I mean, she likes what she likes, you know, and she likes some things that kind of surprises me. Like, wow, that's pretty deep. When she tells me that I ruin music for her because I'm listening at a deeper level and pointing out things, and she's going, "Okay, well now you ruined it." Because now all I can hear is that cowbell in the left. I can't, like look at that clave. Oh my God, or that phrase on the trumpet, and so that's it. I ruin it for her. But anyway, it's
That's
amazing,
funny.
amazing things.
It's funny
Listen,
you say that too. I mean,
yeah,
one of the things I love about this as well is speaking with someone like yourself, speaking with the people that I speak to on my podcast. It's like I realize how much of what I think is at least funny, if not crazy in my head, is actually not that at all. It's there are thousands of us and more out there who think that way. years ago, I had bought an album by Bjork that had the song Army of Me. And I just thought it was such a cool sound. Like, just what an interesting way to approach music. I played it, and my wife, who really doesn't think about music much at all, you know, I could play
Her
the same
mind
song
is
three
not
times
on
in a row.
music.
She might not. I'm sorry?
I said her mind is not necessarily on music.
It's not. I could play the same song three times in a row, and she might not notice that. Which in a coffee shop or something, if they play the same song twice in a row, it drives me insane. You know. So I played Bjork, and she was like, just puttering around the house like we do, and she was like, "Oh, what's that? That's cool." you know. But what I didn't do, because you just mentioned the cowbell and the left side and stuff, I didn't sit down and start to tell her what I love about that recording. The synthesizers, the way she does these repetitive parts, and I just let her enjoy it. you know
Smart man. Smart man.
well, yeah, because it's I know her, and like, your wife, like, I'm sure you don't do that often anymore.
Well, let me tell you a quick story about we were married, I don't know, 2 years maybe. Okay. Maybe less. But she knows because we didn't date long. I mean, I wanted to marry this woman. 5 months into our courtship, I was like, that's it. Boom, you're mine. Proposed to her. We got married 4 months after that. So we didn't date a whole year before I married. She knows that this guy is into music. She knows my history with some of the recording and bands and stuff that I'd been in. Okay. But she didn't understand the depth of it, right? So here I am in my little home studio, like I said, maybe less than 2 years, and I'm concentrating. I'm on this mix, and I have my Tascam 688 at the time, okay? We went from the Porter 1 to Porter 2 to 688, so I'm moving up, right?
Yeah.
I've got the MPC, the Akai MPC, and I'm concentrating on this hi-hat. Like, this hi-hat really has to swing, right?
Mm.
What I don't realize is that, of course, I'm in my little zone, that I have it turned up loud enough where that's all she's hearing. She's not hearing the context of the whole song, right? And I'm just like back on it, and it's just got, because even when I program drums, I'm a drummer, but when I program drums, they have to sound like a drummer. They have to, not that artificial swing, they have to have that, you know what I mean? That thing.
I do.
Long,
Yeah.
long story short, I hear this little knock on the door, and she just opens the door and she says these words: "I wish you would listen to me like that."
Ouch.
Closes closes the door. I'm like, okay.
Lesson
Okay.
learned.
Amazing, right?
Oh my.
So here
It's
we are 28 years later, and you know, we she hardly ever comes to the studio with me. Hardly, just that's your thing, and she enjoys what she enjoys, and the two worlds don't cross
Yeah.
unless they have to.
Well, I mean, that's why I do a lot of my recording here in the studio. When you're working on a computer, I don't actually need to be in the studio to do all the stuff that I do here, right? There are certain moments if I'm doing a guitar part, whatever. But it comes down to that, is I've been at home doing that, mixing something, and it could be that. It could be like that kick drum doesn't have enough point on it. The attack is not quite right. And so now I'm turning it up because I need to hear it sonically in the room. I can't just hear it in headphones. And my daughter will come over and say, "Bubba, you've been listening to that kick drum for like, half an hour, 45 minutes, whatever. Could you please turn it down?" This is a 16-year-old asking dad to turn the music down.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, she gets it. She must know my wife. I mean,
Yeah.
it's just like, wait a
my
minute.
my kids, both of my kids, love music. They love the music that they love, and they love it in the way that they love it. But I mean, Ellie's in grade 9, Royal Conservatory of Music currently, Lucas is in grade 6 violin. Ellie plays piano. They get it. So they understand my eccentricities in terms of my focus and my love for music. They get it. But there's a moment where she's like, okay, I get it. But that kick drum, if I hear it hit one more time, I'm just gonna go crazy.
Jeremy, actually, I don't know what the point of this interview was other than to find out more about who you are. And I'm grateful that we did it. Like I said before, the one thing the advice that I can give those of you who are watching or listening is to listen to the podcast that Jeremy did when he was interviewing me, because it was much more structured. There was questions that were just like right in line, and I think I answered dutifully, and I think you'll find out more about him, on that and his interview style, and how much better a podcast isn't it again. Here's my nose. How much better his podcast is than this one. But I wanted to know about him, and I'm so grateful, Jeremy, that you just poured open everything. Like the trip to Ecuador, I was on that trip with you, man. The flights that you made, Venezuela, all of that was just fantastic. This will not be our last interview, but if we keep going, we can go 5, 6 hours, man. And I don't know what that does for podcast time. I know long form podcasts are a good thing, but 5 hour podcasts, I just don't know.
That might
So
be much.
might be
I
a little bit.
thank you. I really enjoy talking with you, Jerry. As you said, it's not our first time talking, and I really hope I know it's not going to be our last time talking for sure. And what you're saying, I really appreciate what you're saying about our mind on music. I enjoy making it, and little by little, more and more people are hearing about it. So, it means a lot to me that you think it's well done, because
Definitely well done. Definitely.
I
And you do these
respect your
things.
opinion.
Let me tell people about this too. You do these little edits and cuts, and you have different pictures coming in and out, and you got these fades going on. I was like, check this cat out, man. Just check this dude out. But no, it's very well put together. It's entertaining. It's enjoyable. The light banter. The people whom you choose to interview, the material, your angle, your perspective, all of that. I'm checking it out, man. It's right on point. So.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And I really like what you're doing on this podcast, and then also on um, the artist impact that you're doing. Like your the whole breadth of what you are doing with your community and through the Entre Musician is really fantastic. So people are watching this right now. They already know something about it, and I really appreciate that you and your community are there. And I count myself lucky that I feel like I've become part of this community too. So thank you. I
Absolutely.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. Well, you're a born entree musician. I mean, I could see that from square one, from our first interaction on LinkedIn. This guy gets it. He knows what's happening. So yeah, definitely. Now, how can people get in touch with you? We've mentioned LinkedIn. Our Mind on Music is on Spotify. It's on Apple Podcasts. It's wherever you. But can they reach out to you specifically? Is there an email address? Is there a place that they can go and interact? You mentioned the Facebook page. Tell us.
Yeah. So our Mind on Music, if you just do our Mind on Music all together, no caps, no spaces, etc., Google that, and everything everywhere we are comes up. YouTube is our main focus for presenting the stuff, but then our Mind on Music at gmail.com is our email. There, of course, are ways to comment through YouTube and Spotify and all those things, WordPress. But if you wanted to comment or communicate directly, our Mind on Music at gmail.com is our direct email.
Fantastic, fantastic.
Yeah,
Was there a
thank you.
question that you just knew? Well, Jerry's gonna ask me this question. He's just going to, and I didn't ask it. So we call that the unasked question. Can you answer the unasked question? Because it's like, doggone, I was ready, and he never brought it up.
Not really. I mean, I guess when we talked about, I mean, the podcast stuff, I think you've covered everything that I could possibly want to say to people about why I make it, where it's available, and the fact that it's connected to a blog as well on WordPress. I think in terms of my teaching, it would be too long to explain all the way through, but you and I have talked about how I approach teaching, which is I want kids to not just learn music, I want them to learn how much they can love it. So students choose their own repertoire, and then I arrange that music for the different levels within the group and the different instruments. So I guess just from a teacher perspective, that's something I'm really proud of, that I'm able to do that, and that the students themselves are choosing. When parents come to the winter concert next weekend that we're going to put on, the students that are playing those instruments chose the songs and the instruments that they're playing, which is how you and I came up in music. Like, you chose to be a drummer. Lots of factors influencing that decision, but you chose it. And as much as I studied piano with the Royal Conservatory, I consider myself principally a guitarist now. You know, why? I don't know. It's just the way the wind took me, you know? And so I'm trying to build that into what I'm teaching students as well, so that if they go on with music, whatever that means, it's with a love and a knowledge that they can control it.
Mm, that's beautiful. That's the
Thank you.
perfect way to end the podcast. That's why you're so good at this. This is fantastic.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I love chatting with you, so I appreciate that, and I appreciate the invite.
Absolutely. Well, this is Jeremy Van Sluytman, and he is a heavy duty dude. Please email him. I want his inbox to be inundated with your emails, especially on the Rumors review. So get on it and make sure you hold his feet to the fire. But that's Jeremy. We are entree musicians. My name is Jerry B. I'm an entree musician, but here's what's most important, and you guys know this. So are you. So go after
All
it.
right.
Peace and
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.